I was assigned to debrief a returning POW on a Tuesday morning in November. This was not unusual. Debriefing returning personnel is part of the work I do, the careful, methodical extraction of information from people who have been in places and circumstances that require documentation and analysis. I have done it many times. There is a protocol. There is a structure. The protocol exists because the information matters and because the people who carry it have been through experiences that require a specific kind of care in the extraction. The assignment came through my direct superior, Colonel James Whitmore. He called me at 0700 and told me there was a returning POW who had been recovered in the previous 48 hours, that the initial medical clearance was complete, and that I was the assigned debriefer. I said, "What's the background?" He said, "Sergeant First Class Daniel Torres, captured 14 months ago during an operation I cannot brief you on fully before you go in. He's been held in a location we've been trying to identify. He's physically recovered sufficiently for initial debriefing." I said, "What's the protocol level?" He said, "Standard initial. Your clearance is sufficient." I said, "Who else is assigned?" He said, "You're primary. I'll be observing remotely." Standard. Routine. The ordinary architecture of a classified debriefing assignment. I drove to the facility. I reviewed the minimal file I had been given on Torres, rank, unit, the date of capture, the bare operational context that existed at my clearance level. I prepared my questions in the way I always prepare them, in order of priority, with the flexibility that a good debrief requires, with the specific attentiveness to what is said and what is not said that 12 years of this work has built into me. I walked into the debriefing room at 0900. The man across the table looked at me. Before I had said a single word, before I had introduced myself, before I had stated the date and time for the record, before I had done any of the things the protocol requires, he said, "Nightfall." I want to tell you about the 2 seconds between him saying that word and my next action, because those 2 seconds contained more than I can fully reconstruct. Nightfall. My classified code name. Not my name, not my rank, not any designation associated with me in any official capacity that a returning POW would have access to. A code name assigned to me during a specific operational period 3 years ago, used within a compartmented program that had since been closed, known, to my certain knowledge, by exactly 3 people. Colonel Whitmore, who had assigned me to this debriefing, Major Rachel Chen, who was my partner in the program and who was currently stationed overseas, and myself. 3 people. He was a Sergeant First Class who had been held as a prisoner of war for 14 months. He should not know this name. There was no legitimate pathway by which he could know this name. The program it belonged to was closed. The documentation was sealed. The code name existed in files that required a clearance level he did not have access to. And yet, he had said it. Before I said anything, the moment he saw my face. I sat down across from him. I said, "State your name and rank for the record." He said, "Sergeant First Class Daniel Torres." He paused. "You heard what I said." I said, "I'm going to conduct this debriefing in standard protocol. Please state the date of your capture." He looked at me for a moment, the look of someone who is assessing whether the performance I was giving was the performance it appeared to be or something else. He accepted it. He stated the date of his capture. We proceeded. I want to tell you about the next 90 minutes, because they were the most disciplined 90 minutes of my professional life. I conducted the debriefing, properly, thoroughly, in the full protocol that the situation required. I asked the questions that needed to be asked. I listened to the answers with the complete, trained attention that this kind of work requires. I documented. I did not deviate from the protocol, and I held what he had said in the specific, careful suspension of someone who is managing 2 things simultaneously: the work in front of her and the problem that has just been introduced into the work that she cannot yet address. Torres was cooperative. He was the specific kind of cooperative that a person is when they have been held for 14 months and have been waiting to come home. Fully present, clear, his recall precise in the way that certain kinds of experience produce precise recall. He answered everything I asked. At 1 hour and 47 minutes into the debriefing, I reached the end of my prepared questions. I said, "Is there anything else you want to tell me that I haven't asked about?" He looked at me directly. He said, "How much of this room is monitored?" I said, "Audio and visual, standard protocol." He said, "Is there any portion of what you want to ask me that you're not going to ask on this record?" I looked at him. I said, "The debriefing is complete for today. We'll schedule a follow-on session." He nodded. He understood. I requested a comfort break at the end of the formal debriefing, stepped out, walked to the bathroom at the end of the corridor, ran cold water, looked in the mirror. Nightfall. 3 people knew that name. Whitmore had sent me to this room. I stood at the sink and I ran through every possible explanation with the rapid, sequential efficiency that the situation demanded. The first explanation, Torres had encountered my codename through a legitimate pathway I was not aware of, a breach in the closed program's documentation, a leak, something that had allowed the name to reach someone who then reached Torres. The second explanation, Torres had been used as a vehicle. Someone had given him the name and told him to say it when he saw me, a signal, a message delivered through the specific mechanism of a returning POW who knew I would be the debriefer. The third explanation, someone wanted me to know something, and they had used the one mechanism that was guaranteed to get my attention. All 3 explanations had one thing in common. The name had traveled from someone who knew it to a place it should not have been, and one of the people who knew it put me in that room. I dried my hands, I walked back to the corridor. I did not go back into the debriefing room. I called Marcus Webb.
Webb answered on the second ring. I said, "I need 48 hours. He said, "What happened?" I told him, quickly, precisely, in the minimum words the information required. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Who assigned you to this debrief?" I said, "Whitmore." Another pause. He said, "Does Whitmore know you know the name?" I said, "He was monitoring remotely. He heard it." Webb said, "Then he knows you heard it, and he knows you understand what it means." I said, "Yes." Webb said, "Claire, whatever is happening, Whitmore sending you into that room knowing that Torres had your code name was either a test or a warning. I don't know which one yet. But either way, the next 48 hours are going to matter." I said, "What do I do?" He said, "You document everything, right now, before anything else. You write down what happened in that room in the exact words Torres used and the exact sequence, and you send it to me encrypted before you do anything else." I said, "Done." "What else?" He said, "You don't go back into that room without me knowing." I said, "Understood." He said, "And Claire, don't confront Whitmore, not yet. Let me find out what I can find out in the next 24 hours. I said, "How long have you known Whitmore?" Webb was quiet. He said, "Long enough to not be surprised that his name is in this conversation." I want to tell you about the 24 hours between my call with Webb and what he found, because they were the 24 hours in which I had to continue doing my job as though nothing had happened. I wrote the documentation, encrypted, sent to Webb. I attended my afternoon meetings. I did the work of a Tuesday afternoon in November at a military intelligence facility. I spoke to colleagues. I was present and professional. Whitmore called me at 1400 to ask how the debriefing had gone. I said, "Initial debriefing complete. Torres is coherent and cooperative. I'd recommend a follow-on session in 48 hours after he's had more rest." Whitmore said, "Anything notable?" I said, "I'll have my full report to you by end of day." He said, "Good work, Captain." I said, "Thank you, sir." I hung up. I sat at my desk. I thought about what Whitmore had just said. Anything notable? The question of a man who had been monitoring the debriefing remotely and who had therefore heard Torres say Nightfall and who was now asking me whether there was anything notable. He was asking me what I was going to do with it, or he was asking me how much I knew, or he was doing something else entirely, and I did not have enough information yet to know which. I wrote my end-of-day report. I did not include Torres saying my code name. I submitted it. I went home. I did not sleep.
Webb called me at 0600 the following morning. He said, "I need you to listen to everything I'm going to say before you respond." I said, "Go ahead." He said, "Whitmore has been under internal review for 7 months, not by the IG, by a counterintelligence unit that I have a contact in. The review is in relation to a suspected information breach that occurred 14 months ago." He paused. I said, "Torres was captured 14 months ago." He said, "Yes." He said, "The suspected breach involved classified program documentation being accessed by someone with senior officer credentials. The codename Nightfall was in that documentation." I said, "Whitmore accessed the Nightfall files." He said, "That is what the counterintelligence unit believes. They've been building the case for 7 months." I said, "And Torres?" He said, "Torres was in the operational environment where the breach had downstream effects. It is possible, the counterintelligence unit believes it is probable, that Torres encountered information related to the breach during his captivity, information that included the codename." I said, "Whitmore sent me to debrief Torres because..." Webb said, "He needed to know what Torres knew, and he needed to assess whether you knew that he was the source of the breach. Sending you into that room with Torres was a way of gathering that assessment." I said, "He used the debriefing as intelligence collection, on me." Webb said, "Yes." I sat with that for a moment. I said, "What do I do?" He said, "Nothing, for now. My contact needs 24 more hours. They've been building this case for 7 months and they don't want it disrupted." He said, "You go to work, you do your job. You do not indicate to Whitmore in any way that this conversation happened." I said, "And Torres?" Torres said your code name the moment he saw you because he needed you to know. He didn't know if you would understand what it meant. He was taking a risk. I said, "He was warning me." He said, "He came home with information and he needed it to get to the right person. He chose the moment he was given, the debriefing, and he chose the signal that would mean something to the right person without meaning anything to the wrong one." He said he chose correctly. The counterintelligence unit moved on Thursday morning. I was not in the room when it happened. I was at my desk, doing the work of a Thursday morning, when my sergeant came to my office and said that there was something happening at the command level that I should be aware of, and that Colonel Whitmore had been escorted from the building at 0900. I said, "I see." My sergeant looked at me for a moment, with the specific expression of someone who has known me for several years and who is reading something in my face that he cannot quite name. He said, "Captain, was there anything you want to tell me about this week?" I said, "I'll have a full report for the new acting commander by end of day." He said, "Yes, ma'am." He left. I sat at my desk. I thought about Torres in the debriefing room, the moment he saw my face, the word before anything else, Nightfall. A signal sent across 14 months of captivity and 48 hours of a debriefing room. A risk taken by a soldier who had come home with information and who had needed to find the right person to give it to. He had found me. I had heard him. I went back to see Torres on Friday morning, not for a formal follow-on debriefing. I went as myself, not the debriefer in the protocol, just the person who had been in that room on Tuesday. I sat down across the table. He looked at me. I said, "He's been escorted from the building." Torres closed his eyes for a moment, the specific, complete expression of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and who has just been told it has landed. He said, "How long have you known?" I said, 48 hours after you told me." He said, "I didn't know if you would understand. I didn't know if the name still meant something. It had been 3 years." I said, "I understood." He said, "I couldn't say it directly, not in that room, not with monitoring." I said, "I know. You said what you could say." He said, "Was it enough?" I said, "It was exactly enough." He looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, 7 months ago they told me a counterintelligence unit was working on it, that they were close. I didn't know if I would get home in time to matter." I said, "You got home?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I got home."
I want to say something about the word. Nightfall. 8 letters. A code name from a closed program. A word that had no meaning in that room to anyone except the 2 people at that table and the 1 person listening remotely, who had not anticipated that the person he was using as a tool would recognize what it meant and know what to do with it. Torres had been in captivity for 14 months. He had come back with 1 piece of information that he had needed to deliver to 1 specific person without the wrong person knowing he was delivering it. He had been given 1 window, the debriefing, in which to do it. He used 8 letters. 8 letters said before I had spoken a single word that initiated the 48 hours that produced the Thursday morning when Whitmore was escorted from the building. I think about this often, about the economy of it, about the specific, practiced discipline of someone who has learned, in conditions I will not describe and do not want to imagine, to communicate exactly what needs to be communicated in exactly the space available. 8 letters. Exactly enough. She doesn't stay silent. She doesn't stay broken. She rises. Sometimes rising is sitting across a table in a debriefing room and hearing 1 word and understanding everything it means. Sometimes the most important thing you do all week is listen. Really listen to the thing being said in the only way it can be said, in the room it has to be said in. 8 letters. She heard them. Subscribe. New story every week, and every single one of them ends the same way. She rises. Leave a comment. Have you ever understood something important that was said in a way that wasn't direct? I read every single one.